So I have a question for the whole group in sort of two parts, and folks can speak to one aspect, and I think some of our recently promoted professors can speak to the other. So I think we all know that Sinai is a place that's ever changing, and we're bringing in more and more folks with different kinds of skills, engineers, people who are not the traditional academic medicine. And so part of my question is, how are the A&P committee dealing with this and thinking strategically about how to make sure that they can be incorporated into this process, and what are the concrete steps they've taken? And then the second part of my question is more directed towards those, I think probably most Shirish and Theresa. You guys have sort of large leadership hospital function roles, right? And how did you use those to help you in your promotion process? Because those are a little bit outside of the track. It probably doesn't matter what your rank is as CMO, it just matters that you're CMO, right? So I just want to have a little bit of thought, and you're sort of thinking about that for others in the audience who might have a similar career path.
Well, let me maybe start with some of the non-traditional candidates we've seen. So over the last 5 or 6 years, I guess, Sinai has actually brought in a lot of people who were in industry and who actually were, running large research labs and doing very significant work in industry. But of course, they have no publications because when you work for a company, they don't actually encourage you to write about what they've developed or discovered for the rest of the world to take advantage of. And so I think the APT committee, was very thoughtful about understanding that these people are different. When someone goes up for, well, it depends on the track and the rank, but associate or professor, whenever there's tenure involved, there's an ad hoc committee that's formed. And so I think the ad hoc committees actually were really insightful about understanding that there had to be other ways to determined that these people actually had been doing significant science. A lot more weight was put on the letters because there really weren't publications to speak of. But it's also the position of the committee, and in case some of you came in and got such an initial appointment, that now that you are in academia, the regular rules apply. So maybe you came in at associate professor from industry based on the science you had done, but without any publications. But now to go from associate to professor, you will have to have grants and publish papers the same as people who had come up through the academic track from the beginning. So, but obviously if you work for a company, you don't write grants, your lab is funded and so on. So I think the initial appointments have been handled really well. But continued advancement will be along academic rules. And so if there are any people in the audience in this situation, you need to know that, that now you're playing by the same rules and you have to write. You want to say something?
I think Sinai's been very engaged in trying to be on the forefront of this. We're not the only institution that's confronting it. So the key descriptor is dissemination of knowledge and impact. And so there's many ways to disseminate, and there's many ways to show the impact. The chair's letter has to focus on that to help the committee understand what the person has done, to put it in context. But we definitely, as Dr. Turam said, we recognize non-traditional ways of disseminating knowledge. We had a faculty who was promoted because his podcasts get 150,000 downloads a month. So that's over 1 million downloads a year. I mean, that's just huge impact, but it has to be framed in a context that the committee can understand. But we're very open to that. And for those of you
what is a podcast?
What is a podcast? Yeah. For those of you who are on the practice track, the practice track is wide open, and it's a wonderful avenue to go up for professor. But again, you have to show that you've had impact beyond the local area, either through workshops or seminars or blogs or whatever you're doing, but you have to have that dissemination. But we've gone way beyond the traditional metrics of academia in recognizing excellence here.
I have a simple answer to Liz's question about CMO. It actually didn't play any role in my promotion because I was actually promoted before I became CMO. So that's the good news for everybody here. You don't have to be CMO to get promoted. The bad news for me is that 2016 was a great year. I became a professor, I became a CMO, and the Cubs won the World Series. So it's all downhill from here for me. So.
I'll just comment briefly as well. Just coming from a resource standpoint, as Lynn, Dr. Richardson stated, it's more of developing and building that niche where folks see the value of what you do and bring to the Institute, as well as sending that message outside as far as best practices in the space where you maintain that resource. So publications weren't a part of my package heavily as you guys maintain as far as research investigators, but the development and refinement of the space was key, and I having others comment on that. So if you are in a resource or a core type environment where that's your main space, make sure you develop strategies to build that spot to the homework where you can actually have folks come in from external locations to utilize your services, in that regard.
I think quickly, I was lucky enough and am lucky enough that even as I moved positions from a more academic clinician educator position to hospital work, that I kept in touch and continued to keep in touch with the colleagues I had published with previously from my still clinical home at Mount Sinai visiting doctors, and in some of the population health work I was doing, we made sure, and this is where I think peer or group mentorship really helps, that we made sure any clinical activity we did resulted in either an abstract, a poster. We were clinicians, we were educators, but any curriculum we developed, we turned it into a poster, and we sort of kept that in the back of our minds, even from very early on, so that, again, it becomes second nature that something you do because you want to or you're assigned to do becomes academic and promotable or a evidence of dissemination for you. Over the last 2 years, I wouldn't even call them papers, but the dissemination work has been more industry panel talks or, commentaries that are online or in, a commentary on an article as opposed to an original article. And again, I think it was part of the decision that I changed tracks to be able to validate that kind of work as a promotable way to show your expertise.